The billionaire was about to faint in a $2 coffee shop. And Sarah Chen had no idea she was wearing a piece of jewelry that men had killed for. This is the story of how a single glance at a dead woman's brooch would unravel a 200-year-old conspiracy and change the fate of American history forever. The coffee cup slipped from William Thornfield's fingers and shattered on the cracked linoleum floor of Miller's diner. For a man worth $8 billion, a man who'd negotiated with presidents and owned half of Manhattan, this moment of complete loss of control was unprecedented. And it was all because of what a 23-year-old waitress named Sarah Chen was wearing on her uniform collar. "Sir. Sir, are you okay?" Sarah rushed toward him with a handful of napkins, concern written across her tired face. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months straight, trying to pay off her grandmother's medical bills, and the last thing she needed was a customer having a medical emergency. But William Thornfield wasn't having a heart attack. He was staring at Sarah's brooch, a delicate piece of silver and emeralds that she'd inherited from her grandmother, like he was seeing a ghost rise from the dead. Because he was. "Where?" His voice came out as a whisper. "Where did you get that?" Sarah's hand instinctively went to the brooch. It was a small thing, really. Intricate silver ivy leaves intertwined around tiny emeralds and pearls. Her grandmother Lily Chen had always called it just old costume jewelry, but she'd clutched it obsessively during her final days in the hospital, whispering about promises and secrets that Sarah never understood. "It belonged to my grandmother," Sarah said, still holding the napkins. "She passed away last month." "Why?" William's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. The color had completely drained from his face, and for a moment, Sarah wondered if she should call 911. "Charles," he said into the phone, his voice barely controlled. "Drop everything. Fly to Detroit. Now. Bring every document we have on the Revolutionary War collection. Every photograph. Every authentication record." He hung up and looked at Sarah with an expression that was part terror, part amazement. "Miss, I need you to understand something very carefully. That brooch you're wearing isn't costume jewelry. It's the Emerald Ivy brooch, created by master silversmith Paul Revere in 1789 as a personal gift from Martha Washington to Abigail Adams." Sarah blinked. That's impossible. My grandmother bought this at a thrift store in Chinatown." "Your grandmother lied to you." William's voice was gentle now, but his eyes were intense. "That brooch is one of 13 pieces in the Martha Washington Freedom Collection, jewelry commissioned to celebrate America's independence. The entire collection vanished during the War of 1812. Historians have been searching for these pieces for over 200 years. Sarah sank into the booth across from him, the napkins forgotten in her hand. "You're saying this is, what? Worth money? Worth money?" William almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Miss Chen, you're wearing a piece of jewelry worth approximately $12 million. But that's not the important part." "What's the important part?" William leaned forward, and Sarah could see decades of careful composure cracking apart. "The important part is that according to the documents my family has been protecting for 8 generations, whoever possesses the Emerald Ivy brooch has legal claim to something far more valuable than the jewelry itself." "What?" "The lost treasury of the Founding Fathers, a collection of gold, silver, precious stones, and historical documents worth over $500 million, hidden somewhere in the original 13 colonies before the British burned Washington, D.C. Sarah stared at him. The diner around them, with its flickering fluorescent lights and smell of old grease, suddenly felt like a movie set, surreal and impossible. "You're insane," she whispered. "Miss Chen," William said quietly, 3 people have been murdered in the last 50 years for asking questions about the Martha Washington collection. And now you're wearing the key to the greatest treasure hunt in American history." Outside, Sarah could see 2 black SUVs pulling into the diner's parking lot. "Who are they?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. William's face went gray. "People who've been waiting a very long time for that brooch to surface." And Sarah Chen's ordinary life was about to end forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the brooch on her collar. I'm taking this off right now. No. William grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly gentle despite the urgency in his voice. Don't touch it. If you remove it now, in front of them. He nodded toward the black SUVs, they'll know we've identified it. Who are they? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Before William could answer, the diner's bell chimed. Two men in expensive suits entered, not the kind of expensive that meant success, but the kind that meant violence dressed up pretty. They moved with the controlled precision of predators, their eyes immediately scanning the nearly empty restaurant. Act normal, William murmured, picking up his coffee cup with hands that had steadied remarkably. We're just having a conversation. The taller of the two men approached their booth. He had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes, the smile of a shark. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying a slight Eastern European accent. I am looking for someone. A woman who might be wearing a piece of vintage jewelry. Perhaps you have seen such a person. Sarah felt ice water flood her veins, but William's voice remained perfectly calm. I'm sorry, we haven't noticed anyone like that. Just having coffee and discussing my business proposal with Miss Chen here. The man's eyes flicked to Sarah, lingering for a moment on her collar. The brooch was partially hidden by her hair, but not entirely. Ah, the man said slowly. Miss Chen. That is an interesting name. Chinese ancestry, perhaps. Yes, Sarah managed. How fascinating. You know, there was once a Chinese family in this area, grandmother named Lily, I believe, who possessed something very valuable. Something that did not belong to them. William's coffee cup hit the table with a soft clink. I think you gentlemen are in the wrong place. Are we? The second man had moved to block the diner's front exit. Mr. Thornfield, isn't it? William Thornfield of the Boston Thornfields. Descendants of the Revolutionary War patriot Nathaniel Thornfield. Sarah's blood ran cold. These men knew exactly who they were. What do you want? William asked, his voice losing all pretense of casualness. What has been rightfully ours for over 2 centuries, the first man replied. The Liberty's Heart Collection, 13 pieces of jewelry commissioned by the founding fathers' wives, hidden when the British burned Washington. Your ancestor Nathaniel made certain promises about protecting these items. Promises that were never fulfilled. Sarah's mind raced. Wait, you're saying my grandmother stole this? The man's laugh was cold. Stole. Oh no, Miss Chen. Your grandmother was murdered for it. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. What? Lily Chen didn't die in a hospital from cancer, the man continued, his smile becoming genuinely cruel now. She died because she refused to tell us where she'd hidden the brooch. And you, my dear, have been wearing our property to work every day for the past month. William slowly reached into his jacket. Sarah, when I say run, you go straight through that kitchen door. I wouldn't, the second man said, pulling back his coat to reveal a gun holster. This can be very simple. Miss Chen removes the brooch, places it on the table, and walks away. No one gets hurt. No one else has to die. Sarah's world was tilting on its axis. Her grandmother, murdered. The sweet woman who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd taught her to make dumplings and told her stories about coming to America with nothing but hope and a suitcase, had been killed by these monsters. She was all I had, Sarah whispered, tears starting to blur her vision. And now you have a choice, the first man said. You can join her. Or you can live. Give us the brooch. Sarah looked at William, whose face had gone pale but determined. She thought about her grandmother's last words in the hospital, keep it safe, little sparrow. Someone will come for it one day. Someone who understands what it really means. Suddenly, Sarah understood. Her grandmother hadn't been protecting stolen property. She'd been protecting American history itself. No, Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I'm sorry. Sarah stood up slowly, her hand moving to the brooch. I said no. This belonged to Martha Washington. It belongs in a museum, not in some private collection of killers. The man's smile disappeared entirely. He nodded to his partner, who started moving toward their booth. That's when William Thornfield did something completely unexpected. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and pressed a button. Immediately, every phone in the diner started buzzing. The few other customers looked down at their devices in confusion. What did you do? The first man demanded. William smiled, a real smile, unlike anything the criminals could manufacture. I just sent a photo of that brooch to every major news outlet, museum, and historical society in the country, along with GPS coordinates of this exact location. The man's face went white. You wouldn't. Waitress discovers priceless Revolutionary War artifact, William continued. Lost Martha Washington jewelry found in Detroit diner. I imagine the headlines will be quite spectacular. Outside, Sarah could hear sirens approaching. Not police, something else. News vans. You see, gentlemen, William said, his voice now carrying the full authority of $8 billion, the moment this story goes public, that brooch becomes the most famous piece of jewelry in America. Which means Sarah Chen becomes the most famous waitress in America. Very hard to make famous people disappear quietly. The first man was already backing toward the door. This isn't over. Actually, William said, I think it is. Sarah, I believe we have some reporters to talk to. And after that, I think you and I need to have a much longer conversation about your grandmother's real story. As the news vans pulled into the parking lot and the criminals melted away into the Detroit morning, Sarah realized her life had just changed forever. She was no longer just a waitress wearing her grandmother's jewelry. She was the guardian of American history. And the real adventure was just beginning. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself sitting in the back of William Thornfield's Bentley, watching Detroit disappear in the rearview mirror. The weight of her grandmother's secret, now her secret, pressed against her chest like a stone. Where are we going? She asked, fingering the brooch she'd refused to remove despite the chaos of reporters, historians, and museum officials who descended on Miller's diner. My estate in Connecticut, William replied, not taking his eyes off the road. It's the only place where we can properly examine what your grandmother left you without interference. What did she leave me? Really? William was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. But your grandmother wasn't just protecting a piece of jewelry. She was the last guardian of the Covenant of Liberty, a secret pact made between the wives of the Founding Fathers. Sarah stared at him. A pact about what? About what would happen if America ever lost its way. If democracy failed, if corruption took hold, if the principles they died for were forgotten. William's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The Martha Washington collection wasn't just jewelry, Sarah. Each piece was a key. A key to what? To the Freedom Cache, a repository of gold, documents, and artifacts hidden in 13 locations across the original colonies. Enough wealth to rebuild the country from nothing. Enough evidence to expose every corrupt political dynasty in America. And enough power to start a second American Revolution if necessary. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. That's insane. Is it? William pulled the car over to the side of the highway and turned to face her. Sarah, why do you think your grandmother came to America? Really? She was fleeing poverty in China. Looking for a better life. No. She was fleeing them. William nodded back toward Detroit, toward the men who'd threatened them. The Order of the Crown, descendants of British loyalists who never accepted America's independence. They've been hunting the Freedom Cache for over 200 years. Sarah's mind was reeling. My grandmother was involved in some kind of conspiracy. Your grandmother was a hero, William said fiercely. Lily Chen wasn't her real name. She was born Li Weiming, the daughter of a Chinese diplomat who discovered the order's plans to infiltrate American politics in the 1950s. When she exposed them, they tried to kill her entire family. She fled to America with nothing but the clothes on her back and a promise to protect something that didn't even belong to her culture. The brooch. One of 13 keys to the most important secret in American history. And Sarah. William's voice became almost gentle. You're not just wearing it by accident. You're her chosen successor. Sarah looked down at the brooch, its emeralds catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the car window. I don't understand. The Freedom Cash isn't just about money or power. It's about choice. The choice to rebuild America the way the founders intended, free from the corruption that's been growing like cancer for decades. William started the car again. Your grandmother spent 50 years preparing for this moment, the moment when the corruption became so bad that someone would need to open the cash. And you think that moment is now? William's laugh was bitter. Sarah, in the last year alone, 3 senators, 2 Supreme Court justices, and the head of the Federal Reserve have been secretly meeting with order representatives. They're not trying to influence American politics anymore. They're trying to own it. As they drove deeper into New England, William explained the true scope of what Sarah had inherited. The emerald ivy brooch was the master key, it could open any of the 13 cash locations. But more than that, it contained something else, a microscopic chip embedded by her grandmother, containing the names, locations, and evidence needed to expose the order's infiltration of American government. So what am I supposed to do? Sarah asked as they pulled up to a mansion that looked like it had been there since the Revolutionary War itself. Start a revolution. No, William said, getting out of the car. You're supposed to finish one. Inside the mansion, William led Sarah to a library that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with leather-bound books, original maps of the colonies, and glass cases containing artifacts that belonged in the Smithsonian. Welcome to the Thornfield Archive, William said. My family has been collecting evidence for 8 generations, waiting for this day. He approached a particular bookshelf and pulled down a volume titled Agricultural Practices in Colonial Massachusetts. Behind it was a small silver panel. William pressed his hand against it, and the panel glowed softly. A section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a room that looked like something out of a spy movie. The real archive, William said, gesturing for Sarah to follow him. Inside were dozens of maps, photographs, and documents. But what caught Sarah's attention was a wall covered in portraits, 13 women in period dress, each wearing a piece of jewelry. The Wives of Liberty, William explained. Martha Washington, Abigail Adams, Dolly Madison, they knew that democracy was fragile. So they created a failsafe. Sarah approached Martha Washington's portrait. The woman wore an emerald brooch identical to the one on Sarah's collar. They each hid part of the truth, William continued. Scattered it across 13 locations so that no single person could abuse the power. But they also knew that someday, someone would need to put the pieces back together. And you think that someone is me? I think, William said quietly, that your grandmother spent her entire life making sure it would be you. That's when Sarah noticed something else on the wall, a recent photograph of her grandmother, standing next to an elderly man she didn't recognize. Who is that? She asked. William's expression became very serious. That's my father, Charles Thornfield. This photo was taken 3 days before your grandmother died. Sarah stared at the image. Her grandmother looked healthy, vibrant, nothing like the cancer patient she'd been told about. She wasn't sick, was she? Sarah whispered. No. She came here to deliver something to my father. Something she'd been protecting for 50 years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. William walked to a small safe in the corner of the room and opened it. Inside was a letter addressed to Sarah in her grandmother's handwriting. My dearest granddaughter. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. I was not the simple immigrant woman you believed me to be. I was a guardian, as my mother was before me, and her mother before her. The brooch I left you is not just jewelry. It is a responsibility. The Order of the Crown grows stronger each day, and soon they will have the power to destroy everything America was meant to be. You have a choice to make, little sparrow. You can live the quiet life I wanted to give you, or you can take up the burden your ancestors carried. But know this, if you choose to fight, you will not fight alone. The children of liberty have been waiting generations for this moment. The cache locations are encoded in the brooch itself. William will show you how to read them. Be brave. Be strong. And remember that sometimes the greatest love requires the greatest sacrifice. Your grandmother. Li Wei-ming. Guardian of the Eastern Key. Sarah looked up to find William watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. There are others, she asked. 12 other families, scattered across the country. Descendants of the original guardians, waiting for someone to activate the keys. William's voice was steady. Sarah, you're not just inheriting a piece of jewelry. You're inheriting the power to save American democracy. And if I say no, then in 20 years, there won't be an America left to save. Sarah looked back at her grandmother's letter, then at the portraits of the wives of liberty, then at the brooch on her collar. For the first time in her life, she understood exactly who she was meant to be. Show me, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was accepting. William nodded and approached a high-tech scanner mounted on the wall. Remove the brooch and place it here. Sarah unpinned the jewelry with trembling fingers and set it on the scanner's surface. Immediately, the room filled with a soft blue light, and holographic images began projecting from the device. What appeared before them took Sarah's breath away. It was a three-dimensional map of the original 13 colonies, with pulsing dots of light scattered across the eastern seaboard. Each light represents a cache location, William explained. Your brooch just activated coordinates that have been dormant for over 200 years. Sarah studied the map. One of the dots was pulsing more brightly than the others. It was located in what looked like Virginia. That one's different, she observed. Mount Vernon. George Washington's estate. The primary cache. William's voice was reverent. According to the Covenant, it contains the original documents, the real Constitution that was never ratified, the true Declaration of Independence with passages that were removed, and George Washington's personal instructions for what to do if American democracy failed. What was removed from the Declaration? William touched the holographic map, and text began scrolling in the air before them. Sarah read words that made her heart race. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government. Women, Sarah whispered. They included women in the original. Abigail Adams insisted on it. But the Continental Congress thought it too radical. William's expression was grim. They removed entire sections about gender equality, about the abolition of slavery, about corporate power being as dangerous as tyrannical kings. So the Founding Fathers were more progressive than history records. But they were also pragmatists. They knew they couldn't implement everything they believed at once. So they created the cash system, a way for future generations to access their full vision when America was ready. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the mansion. William's face went white as he checked his phone. They found us, he said. The order. Worse. Agent Marcus Kane, Victor Kane's brother. The one I told you about earlier. Marcus works for a private military company that the order contracts for their wet work. Sarah could hear vehicles pulling up outside, engines growling like mechanical beasts. What do we do? William was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments around the room. We run. And we take everything with us. He tossed Sarah a backpack and began stuffing it with documents, hard drives, and artifacts. There's a tunnel system beneath the house. It connects to the underground railroad routes that my ancestors helped maintain. The sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere above them. How long do we have? Sarah asked, shouldering the pack. About 3 minutes before they breached the library. William activated another scanner, and a section of the floor slid away, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into darkness. As they descended into the tunnel, Sarah could hear boots pounding overhead and harsh voices shouting orders. William! A voice called out from above, cold, professional, deadly. William Thornfield. We know you're here. And we know you have what belongs to us. Keep moving, William whispered, leading Sarah through a tunnel that looked like it had been carved from living rock. They moved in darkness for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, they emerged through a hidden door into what appeared to be the basement of an old church. Where are we? Sarah asked, brushing cobwebs from her hair. Trinity Church in Hartford. Another safe house. William pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. I'm activating the other guardians. If we're going to do this, we need all 13 keys. All 13 people, you mean? 12 people. You have the master key, the Emerald Ivy. The other 12 each have one piece. William's phone began buzzing with responses. They're scattered across the country, but they've been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Sarah looked at the brooch, which she'd pinned back to her collar. In the dim light of the church basement, it seemed to pulse with its own inner fire. What happens if we actually open all 13 caches? She asked. William's smile was grim. We either save American democracy, or we start the Second American Revolution. And if the order stops us? Then in 50 years, there won't be an America left to save. Just a corporate feudal state run by the descendants of the people our ancestors died fighting. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Sarah Chen. My name is Dr. Elena Martinez. I am the guardian of the Southern Key. Your grandmother saved my family's life in 1987. I am ready to honor the covenant. Where do we meet? Then another text. Marcus O'Brien, guardian of the Western Key. My great-great-grandmother died protecting her peace during the Civil War. Time to finish what she started. And another. Rebecca Washington. Yes, I'm a descendant. Guardian of the Potomac Key. I've been waiting for this call my entire life. Within 20 minutes, Sarah's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from people across the country, teachers, doctors, farmers, soldiers, immigrants, and descendants of slaves, all united by a secret that had been passed down through generations. They're coming, William said, reading over her shoulder. All of them. The children of liberty are gathering for the first time in 240 years. How do we know they're real? How do we know the order hasn't infiltrated? Sarah's question was cut off by the sound of helicopters overhead. Because, William said, grabbing her hand and leading her toward another hidden exit, we're about to find out who we can trust and who we can't. And Sarah? Yes. I hope your grandmother taught you how to fight. As they burst out of the church into the Connecticut night, Sarah could see searchlights sweeping the area and armed figures moving between the buildings. The hunt for the Freedom Cache had begun in earnest. And Sarah Chen, a 23-year-old waitress from Detroit, was about to become the most wanted woman in America. 48 hours later, Sarah found herself in the most unlikely place imaginable, a Waffle House outside Atlanta, Georgia, at 3 a.m., surrounded by 12 strangers who collectively held the power to reshape American history. They didn't look like revolutionaries. Dr. Elena Martinez was a pediatrician from San Antonio who still had formula stains on her scrubs. Marcus O'Brien drove a combine harvester in Iowa and spoke with the slow, measured cadence of someone who spent most of his time alone with cornfields. Rebecca Washington taught third grade in Philadelphia and looked like she'd rather be grading papers than planning to overthrow shadow governments. But when they'd each placed their inherited jewelry on the Waffle House table, rings, necklaces, bracelets, and pins that had been passed down through families for over 2 centuries, something extraordinary had happened. The pieces had begun to glow. Emergency floodlights blazed to life, transforming George Washington's secret vault into a harsh theater of confrontation. Agent Marcus Kane stood at the entrance with 6 armed operatives, but Sarah's attention was focused on the woman beside him. She was elderly, perhaps 80, with silver hair and eyes like winter storms. Despite her age, she radiated the kind of authority that made world leaders step aside. "Lady Margaret Thornfield Ashworth," William whispered, his face going pale. "The Crown Regent." "Hello, cousin," the woman said to William, her British accent cutting through the tension like a blade. "How lovely to see family again after all these years." Sarah clutched the true Constitution against her chest, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. "You're related to him?" she asked William. "Distantly. Very distantly." William's voice was strained. "My family broke from the main Thornfield line during the Revolutionary War. We chose America. They chose the crown." Lady Margaret smiled coldly. "Yes, you chose a rebellious colony over the greatest empire in human history. And look how well that's worked out." She gestured around the chamber. 2.5 centuries of your precious democracy, and what do you have to show for it? Corruption, inequality, political chaos, and a populace so divided they can barely function as a nation. "We have freedom," Rebecca Washington said firmly. "Do you?" Lady Margaret laughed. "You have the illusion of choice while we've quietly purchased your politicians, your media, your banks. You vote for candidates we fund, consume news we shape, work for corporations we own." Agent Kane stepped forward. "Enough talking. Hand over the documents and the jewelry. Now." That's when Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She started reading aloud from the true Constitution. "We the people of the United States, both men and women of every race and creed, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice for all citizens regardless of birth or wealth, ensure domestic tranquility through equality, provide for the common defense against all enemies both foreign and domestic." "Stop," Kane commanded, raising his weapon. Sarah continued reading, her voice growing stronger. "Promote the general welfare through education and opportunity for every child, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, including the sacred right to alter or abolish any government that becomes destructive of these ends." I said stop. But now William joined her, reciting passages he'd memorized from the Thornfield archives. Then Rebecca. Then James. Soon all 4 of them were speaking in unison, their voices echoing through the ancient chamber as they read the words the Founding Fathers had been too afraid to publish, the real vision of American democracy. Lady Margaret's composure finally cracked. "You idealistic fools. You think words on parchment can stop us? We control everything. The banks, the politicians, the military contractors. But you don't control this," Sarah interrupted, pulling out her phone. She'd been live-streaming everything. The entire confrontation, Lady Margaret's confession, the true Constitution, the secret vault, was being broadcast to millions of Americans who were already reeling from the information dump Professor Hartwell had released. "You see," Sarah continued, "while you've been manipulating democracy from the shadows, you forgot something important. Americans don't like being told they can't govern themselves." Kane lunged forward, but William intercepted him. As they fought, Sarah kept reading, kept streaming, kept sharing the words that had been hidden for over 2 centuries. Above them, the sound of helicopters filled the air. But these weren't order helicopters. "FBI," voices shouted from the stairwell. "Everyone on the ground." As federal agents flooded the chamber, Lady Margaret's expression shifted from fury to something that might have been admiration. "Clever girl," she said to Sarah. "You've won this battle. But you have no idea what you've started." She was right. Epilogue, 6 months later. Sarah stood behind a podium in the National Archives, wearing a simple blue dress and the emerald brooch that had changed her life. Behind her, displayed in a place of honor beside the original Constitution, hung the true Constitution in a climate-controlled case. The ceremony was being broadcast live to a nation that was still coming to terms with what they'd learned about their own government. The impeachment proceedings were ongoing. The corruption trials had resulted in dozens of arrests. And the Second Constitutional Convention was scheduled to begin in 3 months. Today, Sarah said into the microphones, "We're not just preserving artifacts. We're preserving the promise America was always meant to keep." In the audience, she could see her fellow guardians. Dr. Martinez was there with her children, Marcus O'Brien had driven his entire extended family up from Iowa, and Rebecca Washington sat with a delegation from the Philadelphia School District. William Thornfield, who'd been cleared of all charges after his cooperation with federal investigators, smiled at her from the front row. They were dating now, something that would have been impossible when she was just a waitress and he was a billionaire. But the events of the last year had stripped away those artificial barriers. The Freedom Cash was never about treasure, Sarah continued. It was about trust. Trust that future generations would be brave enough to fight for what's right, even when the odds seemed impossible. As she spoke, Sarah thought about her grandmother, her real grandmother, Li Wei-ming, who'd sacrificed everything to protect a secret that wasn't even hers to keep. The order of the crown was broken but not destroyed. Lady Margaret had been extradited to face charges, but her lawyers were already working on appeals. The fight for American democracy was far from over. But for the first time in centuries, the fight was being waged in the open, with transparency instead of shadows, with citizens instead of subjects. The Founding Fathers gave us a republic, Sarah concluded, if we can keep it. Today, we choose to keep it. Tomorrow, we choose to make it better. As applause filled the National Archives, Sarah touched the brooch on her collar one last time. Then she unpinned it and placed it in a display case beside the true Constitution. Her days as a guardian were over. Her life as an American citizen was just beginning. And somewhere in Detroit, at Miller's Diner, a new waitress was serving coffee to strangers, completely unaware that she lived in a country where a simple act of courage could still change the world. The revolution was complete. The real work was just getting started.